Welcome back to our journey through the Bible. The valley of Elah was silent, but it was the kind of silence that precedes a storm. For 40 long days, this valley had been the stage for a conflict waged not with arrows and spears, but with fear. Across the ravine stood two armies, the Israelites, led by King Saul, and the Philistines. The Israelites were pinned down, not by overwhelming numbers, but by one man. That man was Goliath. Goliath was a walking fortress, a giant nearly 9 feet tall. He was encased in bronze armor that gleamed menacingly in the desert sun, and the massive bronze spear he carried looked less like a weapon and more like a small tree. Goliath would stride out onto the battlefield every morning and every evening, hurling a challenge that shook the very ground. "Why should we fight a full war?" he roared, his voice echoing off the valley walls. "Send me a man." Goliath was offering a single combat, a duel to decide the fate of nations. "If he can defeat me, we will be your servants. But if I defeat him, you will serve us." But no one answered. Not even King Saul, the tallest and strongest among them, shrank away, unable to muster the courage to face the giant. The entire Israelite army, men hardened by years of war, stood trembling. Goliath's challenge wasn't just physical. It was psychological. He was defying the armies of Israel, and by extension, their God, far away in the peaceful hills of Bethlehem. A young shepherd named David went about his daily life. David was the youngest son of Jesse. He was considered too young for the military. David's life was simple. He spent his days protecting his flock, often facing down dangers like wild animals. He also spent his time playing his harp, composing songs, and singing praises to the God he loved, a God who felt very real and very close to him. One morning, Jesse called David in from the fields. "See how your brothers are doing, and bring back news of their welfare." He found someone to watch his small flock. David rose before the sun that day, loaded the supplies, and began the journey to the valley of Elah. When David arrived at the Israelite camp, he was eager to deliver the supplies and find his brothers among the soldiers. As he began asking about their well-being, the realization of fear started to grow heavy in the air. He was bewildered to see seasoned warriors, men trained for battle, dropping their weapons and scrambling backward, their faces pale with terror. Then he saw Goliath. The sheer size of the giant, his gleaming armor, and the casual contempt in his voice were truly intimidating. But as David listened to Goliath mock Israel, something inside the shepherd boy ignited. He turned to the soldiers nearest him and asked, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" The soldiers explained the reward King Saul had offered: great wealth, marriage to the king's daughter, and tax exemption for his family. But David was focused on the insult, not the prize. Before David could ask more, his oldest brother Eliab heard him speaking. Eliab's face flushed with anger. "Why have you come down here? And who did you leave those few miserable sheep with in the wilderness? I know your conceit and the wickedness of your heart. You just came to watch the battle." Eliab was attacking David's character, trying to shame him into silence. But David was unmoved. "What have I done now? I was only asking questions." He walked away and kept asking. His questions weren't casual. He was challenging the soldiers to confront the fact that they were allowing an enemy to mock their God. Eventually, word of David's strange questions and his unusual bravery reached the tent of King Saul. The king, desperate for any solution, sent for the young man. David stood before the king. He wasn't a soldier. He looked like a farm boy, ruddy-cheeked, bright-eyed, wearing the simple clothes of a shepherd. He stood before the most powerful man in Israel, yet he was calm, with absolute conviction. "Let no one lose heart because of this Philistine," David declared. "I am your servant. I will go and fight him." Saul looked at the youth in front of him, and his heart sank. "You cannot fight this Philistine," the king said gently. "You are only a boy, and he has been a warrior since his youth." He knew his credentials didn't come from military school. They came from the fields. "I alone have been keeping my father's sheep," David began. "When a lion or a bear came and carried off a lamb from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the lamb from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. I have killed both the lion and the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God." Then David spoke the words that truly revealed the source of his confidence. "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul was astonished. He had spent weeks seeking a man with courage, and here was a boy with unshakable faith. It was a kind of power Saul himself no longer possessed. "Go," the king said, finally giving in, "and may the Lord be with you." Saul wanted David to look the part of a champion. He dressed the shepherd in his own royal tunic and bronze armor, placing a heavy bronze helmet on his head and offering his own sword. The equipment was heavy, awkward, and completely unfamiliar. He realized that if he wore Saul's armor, he would be fighting Saul's way. He needed to fight David's way, relying on the skills and the God he knew. "I cannot go in these," he told the king, removing the heavy, confining layers. "I am not used to them." David took his shepherd's staff in one hand. He walked down to the small, bubbling brook that ran through the valley. He bent down and carefully selected 5 smooth, perfectly rounded stones, placing them into his shepherd's pouch. He gripped his sling firmly in his other hand. This was David's weapon, a simple leather sling, the tool he used daily to guide his sheep and scare off predators. It was the only equipment he needed, because his real weapon was his faith. Goliath emerged from the Philistine ranks, his shield-bearer walking ahead. When Goliath realized that this was Israel's champion, he stopped dead, then erupted in laughter that sounded like thunder rolling across the hills. "Am I a dog," Goliath roared, "that you come at me with sticks?" The armies of Israel held their breath, waiting for David to turn and flee. When David spoke, his voice was clear, strong, and unwavering, cutting through the giants' mocking laughter. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin," David cried out, acknowledging the difference in their armaments. "I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals." This was the core of the conflict. Not Israel versus Philistia, but God versus the gods of the Philistines. David gave the final defining declaration. "All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear, that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." Goliath began moving forward, furious and impatient, determined to crush this impudent boy. David was quicker. He ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the giant. He didn't wait. He reached into his pouch, drew out one of the smooth stones, placed it in the sling, and began to whirl it over his head. The stone whistled through the air. It flew true. It struck Goliath directly in the center of his forehead, the one unprotected patch of skin beneath the helmet. The impact was devastating. Goliath's eyes went wide with shock and confusion. The immense force of the blow drove the stone deep into his skull. Then the 9-foot giant swayed, then fell face down onto the ground, silent and still. The Israelites erupted in a tremendous roar. David didn't pause. He ran to where the massive, lifeless body lay, drew Goliath's enormous sword from its sheath, and cut off the giant's head. The sight of their champion dead, defeated by a boy with a pebble, shattered the Philistine morale. The Philistine turned and fled in absolute panic. The Israelites, seeing their fear replaced by sudden, explosive courage, surged forward. They chased the fleeing Philistines, winning a decisive, miraculous victory. The battle that had been delayed for 40 days by fear was won in a single moment, not by the king, not by the mighty warriors, but by a shepherd, boy who relied completely on his God. David returned to the camp that day, carrying the giant's sword and head. He also carried a truth that would echo through history, that faith is more powerful than any armor, and that when we surrender our strength to the Lord, He can use us to defeat any giant in our path. The battle truly belongs to the Lord. If you found inspiration in this story of faith and courage, please subscribe and hit that bell. Don't miss our next story. Thank you for watching.